He wasn't supposed to survive. The sound of something small, something desperate, echoed from the dark basement. Marine Mark Jennings stood frozen at the top of the stairs, the chill of the old house creeping into his bones. His mind raced as his eyes darted over the dimly lit, forgotten space beneath him. The call for help was faint but clear, a cry filled with pain, fear, and hope. Something or someone needed him. Without a second thought, Mark gripped the railing, his hand tightening, and took a step into the unknown. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew, but there was no time for hesitation. He moved down into the basement, every step a descent into darkness, guided only by the echo of the faint cry. As he reached the bottom, his heart pounded in his chest. The basement was colder than he expected, with old boxes scattered around, forgotten memories of a life that had moved on. But then, in the corner, he saw it. A shadow, barely visible in the gloom. He stepped closer, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. The cry came again, a whimper that tugged at his soul. It was weak, but it was alive. Mark's breath hitched as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw a figure huddled in the corner. A German shepherd, shivering, soaked in mud, its fur matted with the remnants of a storm. It was in pain, clearly exhausted, but still fighting to survive. Mark moved closer, his training kicking in. He knelt beside the dog, his fingers brushing through the dirt-encrusted fur. The dog lifted its head slowly, amber eyes meeting his, filled with a quiet desperation. It was clear, this dog had been through hell. Mark's heart ached as he reached for his jacket to cover the animal, instinctively knowing that this wasn't just any rescue. It wasn't just about saving a dog. This was something more. The dog's breathing was ragged, but it wasn't giving up. Mark whispered softly, "You're going to be okay," even though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. The storm outside raged on, but Mark knew that inside, something was changing. The dog, though weak, had found a lifeline in him. Mark gently scooped the animal up in his arms, feeling its fragile body pressed against him, the weight of its suffering pulling at his heart. He rushed up the stairs, never looking back, his mind focused on getting the dog to safety, to warmth, to care. But the real test was just beginning. He wasn't just carrying a dog. He was carrying hope, a bond that would defy the odds. This was only the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. Mark rushed through the door of the small, dimly lit room. The cold air hit him as he stepped inside, the faint smell of antiseptic filling the space. He could feel the weight of the dog in his arms, the fragile body still trembling despite the warmth of his embrace. He gently laid the German shepherd on the soft bedding, his hands working quickly to remove the dirt and mud from its fur. The dog's breathing was shallow, and Mark's heart tightened at the sound. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. He had seen this kind of desperation before, but this time, it felt different. There was something about this dog, its unwavering will to live, even after everything it had endured. Mark didn't know what had happened to it, but it didn't matter now. What mattered was getting it through this. He carefully examined the dog, his fingers brushing over the bruised and battered body. The fur was matted, and its skin was cold to the touch. Mark tried to steady his breath, willing himself not to panic. He had done rescues before, but this was something deeper. He wasn't just a Marine anymore. He was a lifeline. The dog's amber eyes fluttered open, locking with his. For a moment, there was a silent understanding between them. It was a quiet bond, forged in pain, but there was something else there, trust. Mark's pulse quickened, but he kept his focus. He grabbed the emergency medical kit from the corner of the room, his hands moving with precision. The dog whimpered softly as he worked, but Mark kept murmuring reassurances, telling the dog that it wasn't alone anymore. It was going to be okay. He needed to believe it, needed to hold on to that hope. Minutes felt like hours as he cleaned and bandaged the dog's wounds, but finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark stepped back, exhausted but determined. The dog was stable. Its breathing more even now. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the animal. It was still so weak, but there was something there, a flicker of life. Mark wasn't sure if the dog would make it through the night, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to leave it. It had already given him something no one else had in years, a sense of purpose. As he sat in the quiet room, the dog's head resting gently against the pillow, Mark made a promise to himself. No matter what happened, He would not let go of that promise. The bond between them had only just begun, and nothing was going to break it. The days that followed were a blur of routine for Mark. He spent most of his time beside the dog, who, despite its fragile state, had shown small signs of improvement. The trembling had stopped, and its eyes, once dull and lifeless, now glistened with a spark of recognition when Mark entered the room. The bond between them was growing stronger with each passing moment, and Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for this animal. He had promised the dog that he would not leave it, and he intended to keep that promise no matter what. The dog had been through so much, and Mark knew that it was going to take time for it to fully recover. But every day he saw progress. The dog began to eat again, slowly at first, but it was enough to fill Mark with hope. He had always been a man of action, trained to make quick decisions in life or death situations. But this was different. This was something slower, more personal. It was about patience, trust, and the quiet understanding that healing was not just physical, but emotional as well. Mark spent hours talking to the dog, even though it couldn't respond. He told it about his time in the military, about the things he had seen, and the weight he carried from those years. The dog would listen, its eyes focused on him, its ears perked up, as if understanding every word. In return, the dog offered something that Mark had not experienced in a long time: unconditional presence. There were no judgments, no expectations. It simply existed beside him, a silent companion. One evening as Mark sat on the porch, watching the sun set, the dog, now stronger, moved beside him and laid its head on his lap. Mark stroked its fur gently, feeling the warmth of its body, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to relax. It was a moment of peace that he hadn't realized he was craving. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them deepened. The dog began to move more freely around the house, its energy returning, though it still had moments of weakness. Mark was always there, watching over it, making sure it didn't push itself too hard. He wasn't going to let the dog fall again, not on his watch. It was during one of these moments, when the dog was resting by the window, that Mark realized something important. This animal, this dog, had been through hell and back, yet it was still here. It hadn't given up, and neither would Mark. He wasn't just giving this dog a second chance at life. He was giving himself one too. The dog had reminded him of something he had lost, the ability to hope, to believe in the possibility of something better. And in that small, quiet moment, Mark understood that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from what you can do for someone else, but from what you allow them to do for you. Mark sat by the fire, the soft glow from the flames dancing across his face, as the dog, now stronger than ever, rested beside him. The air was cool, the smell of pine trees filling the space, and the world outside felt still, as if time itself had slowed. It had been weeks since he first found the dog, and in that time, they had become inseparable. The bond between them was undeniable, something that neither words nor time could explain. The dog, a once fragile soul, had blossomed into a creature full of energy, eager to explore every corner of the house and yard. Mark, though still haunted by the memories of his own past, had found a strange comfort in caring for this animal. The morning was always the same routine now. Mark would wake up early, stretch his tired muscles, and then head straight to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The dog, always by his side, would nudge his hand with a soft but insistent bark, reminding him that it was time for their walk. Mark smiled, his hand running through the dog's fur, the once damaged coat now soft and healthy. As they walked through the woods behind the house, the dog trotted beside him, its head held high, its tail wagging with each step. Mark couldn't help but marvel at how far the dog had come. It had gone from being on the verge of death to becoming a vibrant, happy companion. For Mark, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. He had seen many things in his life, things that would have broken a lesser man, but nothing had ever affected him like this. The dog had shown him what it meant to fight for life, to not give up even when everything seemed hopeless. As they returned to the house, Mark noticed something different. The dog was no longer just a companion. It had become a part of him, a part of his healing. The loneliness that once consumed him, that had followed him through every step of his life, had begun to fade. For the first time in years, Mark felt at peace. The weight of his past was still there, but it was lighter now, as if shared with someone who understood without needing to speak. The days passed in this new rhythm. Mark would wake up, tend to the dog, and then spend the rest of his day in quiet reflection. He would occasionally go for long drives, letting the road take him wherever it would. But no matter where he went, the dog was always waiting for him when he returned. It had become his constant, a reminder that no matter how hard life had been, there was always something worth fighting for. One afternoon, as Mark sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, the dog came over and nudged his hand. Mark looked down at the animal, a soft smile tugging at his lips. The dog's amber eyes met his, filled with a quiet understanding. In that moment, Mark realized that the dog had given him something he had thought was lost forever: hope. It was a simple thing, really, but it was enough. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark knew that this was just the beginning of their journey. Together, Mark woke up early, as he always did now. The dog, his constant companion, was already at the foot of the bed, watching him with those bright amber eyes. It was as if the dog had learned his routine as well, understanding when it was time to begin the day. Mark smiled softly as he got up, stretching his muscles. The pain in his legs, which had once been a constant reminder of his past, was now something he had learned to live with. But it was easier now, with the dog by his side. He moved slowly, but the dog followed him every step of the way, its energy a silent reminder of how far it had come. After a quick breakfast, Mark and the dog went for their morning walk. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm golden glow across the sky. The woods were still quiet, but the dog's excitement filled the air. It had grown stronger with each day, its movements more confident, more playful. Mark watched as the dog bounded ahead, chasing after a butterfly, its tail wagging furiously. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt a sense of peace. He wasn't alone anymore. The dog had become his partner, his friend, and in many ways, his savior. The weeks had passed in this new rhythm, a rhythm that was slowly healing Mark in ways he hadn't expected. He had thought that rescuing the dog would be the end of the story, but in truth, it was only the beginning. The dog had shown him what it meant to fight for life, to never give up, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. Mark had been through his own battles, fought his own demons, but the dog had given him a new perspective. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, truly living, and finding joy in the small moments. As they reached the clearing in the woods, Mark paused for a moment, watching the dog run around, its joy contagious. He could feel the weight of the past beginning to lift, little by little. He had come so far, and so had the dog. They had both fought their own battles and had emerged stronger, together. Mark had once thought that he was broken, that the pieces of him that had been shattered would never come back together. But the dog had proven him wrong. In some ways, it had been the key to unlocking the parts of himself that he had buried deep down. Mark looked down at the dog, who was now sitting by his side, panting lightly. It looked up at him, its eyes full of trust and understanding. Mark reached down and scratched behind its ears, the connection between them deeper than words could express. They were a team now, a bond forged in the toughest of circumstances. Mark knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The future no longer seemed as uncertain as it once had. There was hope now. There was a reason to keep going. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone. And neither was the dog. Mark sat on the porch as the evening sun dipped low in the sky, painting the world in hues of orange and pink. The dog, now fully recovered, was at his side, its body resting against his leg as it gazed out into the distance. The gentle breeze carried the sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the distant chirping of birds preparing for nightfall. It had been months since Mark found the dog, and every day, it felt like a new chapter in their shared story. A chapter of healing, of rediscovery, and of the bond they had formed. Mark had always been a man of action, someone who moved quickly, decisively, but now, he had learned to slow down. The quiet moments had become just as important as the ones filled with purpose. The dog, once weak and broken, was now a constant source of energy and joy. It had transformed in ways that even Mark hadn't expected, and in return, Mark found himself changing as well. His heart, once hardened by years of service and loss, had begun to soften, slowly but surely. There were no more nights spent staring into the darkness, wondering if he would ever feel whole again. No more days when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. Now, he had the dog, a companion who had shown him what it meant to truly live. As they sat there together, Mark felt a sense of gratitude he hadn't known he was capable of. He wasn't just thankful for the dog's recovery, but for the way it had brought him back to life. Every wag of the dog's tail, every joyful bark, was a reminder of how far they had come. Mark had seen the worst of humanity, had fought battles that had left scars on his body and soul, but this was different. This was a battle for something much more important, his own peace of mind. The dog had helped him find that peace. It had given him a reason to smile again, to look forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. Mark knew the journey wasn't over, that there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he was ready to face them. He had something worth fighting for, not just his own survival, but a life filled with companionship and hope. The dog nudged Mark's hand, as if sensing his thoughts, and Mark reached down to scratch its ears. The connection between them was more than just that of a man and his pet. It was a partnership built on trust, understanding, and a shared will to never give up. As the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, Mark stood up and stretched, the dog following him with eager steps. They walked together into the night, side by side, ready for whatever the future would bring. Mark had learned something valuable, that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from fighting alone, but from having someone beside you, someone who believes in you when you can't believe in yourself. Mark woke up early, as he always did now. The dog, his constant companion, was already by his side, its amber eyes watching him intently. It had become a morning ritual. The dog would wait patiently as Mark rose from the bed, and together, they would begin the day. The quiet of the morning was something Mark had come to appreciate more than ever. It was a reminder of how far he had come, how much he had gained in the last few months. The dog had brought him something he didn't know he needed, a sense of peace. He no longer felt the weight of his past pressing down on him every moment of the day. Instead, there was a lightness in his step, a feeling of hope that had been absent for far too long. As he sat on the porch with the dog by his feet, Mark thought back to the early days of their time together. He remembered the look in the dog's eyes when they first met, a look that mirrored his own pain and uncertainty. But now, that same dog looked at him with trust, with loyalty, as if it knew that together, they could face anything. The bond between them was undeniable. Mark had always been independent, used to handling things on his own. But the dog had shown him the power of companionship. It had reminded him that it was okay to rely on someone, that it was okay to let go of the past and embrace the future. The days that followed were filled with small moments of joy. Mark would take the dog on long walks through the woods, their steps in sync, as if they were moving as one. The dog had learned to trust him completely, and Mark had learned to trust the dog. It was a mutual understanding, an unspoken agreement that they would always be there for each other. One evening, as they sat together, watching the sun set over the horizon, Mark felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. The dog rested its head on his lap, its breathing steady and calm. Mark absent-mindedly stroked its fur, feeling the warmth of its body against his. In that moment, he realized that this was what it meant to truly heal. It wasn't about erasing the past or forgetting the pain. It was about moving forward, one step at a time, with someone who believed in you, no matter what. Mark had once been a man lost in his own thoughts, trapped by the memories of war and loss. But now, with the dog by his side, he had found a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. He was no longer defined by the things that had hurt him, but by the strength he had gained from them. The dog had helped him see that, and for that, Mark would be forever grateful. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Mark realized that this was the life he had been meant to live. A life filled with love, loyalty, and the simple pleasures of companionship. And as he looked down at the dog, who was now fully recovered and thriving, he knew that their journey was far from over. They had both found something worth fighting for, something that made every hardship worth enduring. Together, they had created a new story, one of healing, hope, and unwavering friendship. Mark and the dog had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, their bond growing deeper with each passing day. It was the kind of bond that didn't need words, a silent understanding between them. Every morning, Mark would wake to the familiar sound of the dog's tail thumping against the floor, eager to start the day. They would go for their walks, sometimes through the woods, sometimes along the edge of the lake. The dog, always full of energy, would dart ahead, its tail wagging furiously, but never straying too far. It was as if it knew Mark needed its presence, just as much as Mark needed the dog's. The quiet moments together were no longer just part of the routine. They had become moments of reflection. Mark had learned to appreciate the simplicity of life, the little things he had once taken for granted. The feeling of the cool morning air against his skin, the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the comfort of knowing he wasn't alone. Even on the days when the memories of his past tried to resurface, the dog was there, its steady presence a reminder that he had a future to look forward to. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a soft glow across the sky, Mark and the dog sat on the porch, side by side. The dog rested its head on Mark's knee, its eyes content. Mark looked out over the land, the landscape bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The weight of the world that had once pressed so heavily on his shoulders felt lighter now, almost non-existent. He had come to realize that healing wasn't just about getting rid of the past. It was about learning to live with it, to accept it, and to move forward despite it. It was about finding peace in the present, and Mark had found that peace. The dog, ever watchful, looked up at him, as if understanding the depth of his thoughts. Mark smiled softly, reaching down to scratch behind its ears. They had both come a long way from where they started. Mark had been broken, lost in the shadows of his past, but the dog had pulled him back, one step at a time. And in return, Mark had helped the dog find its strength again. It wasn't just about saving the dog anymore. It was about saving each other. The journey they had been on had changed them both, in ways they hadn't expected. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Mark felt a sense of calm he had never known before. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid. He had the dog by his side, and together, they had built something stronger than just survival. They had built a life worth living, a life filled with hope, companionship, and the quiet understanding that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Mark stood at the edge of the lake, the cool water lapping at his boots as the dog trotted beside him, its tail wagging lazily. The day was perfect, calm, peaceful, a sharp contrast to the chaos he had left behind. It had been a year since he had found the dog, and in that time, so much had changed. The memories of his past still lingered, but they no longer had the power to control him. He had learned to embrace the present, to find solace in the moments that mattered. The dog had helped him understand that healing was not about forgetting, but about moving forward, even with the scars. As they walked along the shore, Mark couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had shifted. A year ago, he had been struggling to get through each day, burdened by the weight of his past. But now, there was lightness to his steps. The dog had given him a sense of purpose, a reason to wake up every day and face the world. It had also taught him about trust. Mark had been reluctant to let anyone in, afraid of being hurt again. But the dog had shown him that trust could be rebuilt, piece by piece. The bond they shared was built on understanding, patience, and a quiet strength that neither of them had realized they had. The dog, once frail and broken, had transformed into a vibrant, energetic companion, always by Mark's side. It had been through its own struggles, but like Mark, it had found a way to heal. Mark watched as the dog bounded into the water, its joy infectious as it splashed around, chasing after a stick. He smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. The dog had given him more than just companionship. It had shown him that there was still joy to be found in life. There was still hope. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Mark sat on the grass, the dog resting its head on his lap. The world around them was quiet. The only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves in the wind and the gentle hum of nature. Mark stroked the dog's fur, feeling the warmth of its body, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. He no longer felt defined by his past, but by the strength he had found in himself and in the dog. The journey they had taken together had been transformative, not just for the dog, but for Mark as well. They had saved each other in ways they both needed, and now, they were stronger because of it. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Mark wasn't afraid. He had found something worth living for, not just the dog, but the life they had built together. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Mark knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, side by side. Mark woke up to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the trees. The dog, as always, was at his side, its body curled up against his leg, its steady breathing filling the quiet of the early morning. It had become their routine, waking up together, the calm of the morning offering them a moment of peace before the world fully awakened. Mark stretched and stood, moving slowly, feeling the familiar pull of his joints as he moved. The dog followed him, eager for the day ahead. The bond between them was as strong as ever, and Mark couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had found something in the dog, not just companionship, but a reason to continue living, to continue hoping. The dog had taught him more about life and healing than he could have ever imagined. As they stepped outside, the cool air brushed against their skin, and Mark took a deep breath, the freshness of the morning filling his lungs. The dog trotted ahead, its ears perked up, tail wagging with excitement, as it always did. Mark smiled and followed, enjoying the simple pleasure of walking alongside the dog. Their steps were in sync, their rhythm unspoken but perfectly matched. It was as if they had become one, connected in a way that words could never fully express. As they walked through the woods, the light from the rising sun casting long shadows across the ground, Mark thought about how far they had come. A year ago, he had been lost in his own pain, barely able to move forward, stuck in the weight of his past. But now, with the dog at his side, things felt different. The dog had given him a new perspective, one that he hadn't realized he needed. It had shown him that healing wasn't just about the physical wounds. It was about the heart, the soul. Mark wasn't the same man he had been when he first found the dog. He was stronger, more at peace with himself, and he owed much of that to the dog. The dog had been there when Mark needed it the most, offering unconditional love and support without asking for anything in return. Mark had found a new sense of purpose, not just in caring for the dog, but in living each day with intention. The future no longer seemed so uncertain. There was still so much to look forward to. As they reached the clearing by the lake, Mark paused, letting the dog run ahead and chase after a few birds that had taken flight. The sight of the dog so carefree, so full of life, filled Mark with warmth. He had come to understand that life was fragile, but it was also beautiful, especially when shared with someone who truly cared. Mark sat on the grass, leaning back, and the dog returned to his side, resting its head on Mark's lap. They sat there for a while, watching the sky slowly change colors as the sun rose higher. The world was waking up, but for Mark, in that moment, everything felt right. He had found peace, and he had found it with the dog by his side. Together, they had created a life that was filled with meaning, a life where hope was no longer just a distant dream, but a reality they lived every day. Mark stood by the window, watching the rain tap lightly against the glass. The dog, now fully recovered and stronger than ever, lay curled up on the rug, its amber eyes reflecting the calm of the room. It had been over a year since they first crossed paths, and in that time, they had both changed. Mark had learned to embrace the quiet moments, the stillness that once felt foreign to him. The dog had become more than just a companion. It had become his anchor, a constant reminder that there was always hope, even when it seemed out of reach. The days of struggling with his past were behind him, but there were still times when the memories resurfaced, uninvited. In those moments, the dog was there, offering its presence without judgment, simply being the loyal companion that it had always been. Mark had learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days were easier than others, but the journey was worth every step. He had discovered a new sense of strength, not just from within himself, but from the bond he shared with the dog. It was a bond built on trust, loyalty, and understanding, a bond that had been tested in ways neither of them could have predicted. They had faced their darkest days together, and now, in the light of a new morning, they had emerged stronger, side by side. Mark turned away from the window and walked over to the dog, who lifted its head as he approached. The dog's tail wagged lazily, a silent greeting. Mark crouched down and scratched behind its ears, feeling the warmth of its fur beneath his hand. It was moments like this that filled him with a sense of peace. The world outside was chaotic, unpredictable, but here, in this room, there was nothing but calm. As the dog rolled onto its back, playfully pawing at the air, Mark couldn't help but smile. It had brought joy back into his life in a way that he hadn't thought possible. He had found a new purpose, not just in surviving, but in living. The dog had helped him see that life was meant to be lived, not just endured. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but with the dog by his side, Mark knew that he could face whatever came next. Together, they had created a new chapter, one that was full of hope and the promise of better days. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside, the world felt peaceful, a quiet sanctuary from the storms of the past. Mark stood up and opened the door, stepping outside into the cool, fresh air. The dog followed him, its tail wagging with excitement, ready for whatever adventure lay ahead. Mark looked down at his companion, a sense of gratitude swelling in his chest. They had come so far, and there was still so much more to experience. With the dog by his side, Mark knew that the future was full of possibility. Mark walked along the trail behind his house, the dog trotting beside him, its paws patting softly against the earth. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the landscape, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mark felt a sense of peace that settled deep within him. The past year had been transformative, not just for the dog, but for himself as well. They had both come so far from where they started. When Mark first found the dog, it was a broken, trembling creature, barely clinging to life. Now, it was full of energy and life, a vibrant spirit that mirrored Mark's own healing. The dog had given him something he hadn't known he was missing, a reason to care, a reason to look forward to tomorrow. It had shown him that healing wasn't just about time. It was about the willingness to move forward, no matter the scars left behind. Mark had learned that sometimes, healing came in unexpected forms. It wasn't just about physical recovery or fixing broken pieces. Sometimes, it was about letting go of the past and embracing what lay ahead. It was about finding beauty in the small moments, the quiet walks, the shared companionship that no words could describe. The dog had taught him that. As they reached the clearing by the stream, Mark sat down on a large rock, watching the dog race ahead, its tail waving in the air. The dog stopped by the water, dipping its head down to drink, and Mark smiled softly. The bond they shared had become more than just man and animal. It had become a partnership, a companionship that was built on trust and mutual respect. Mark had always thought he was meant to face the world alone, that his past had made him unworthy of connection. But the dog had proven him wrong. It had shown him that no matter how broken you are, there is always a chance for redemption, for healing. And as he watched the dog play, Mark realized that he, too, had found his own way to heal. The journey had not been easy, and there were still days when the weight of the past would try to pull him back. But he had learned to carry it with him, to acknowledge it, and to let it shape him into someone stronger. The dog had been his guide through it all, teaching him patience, resilience, and the importance of moving forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark stood up, the dog following close behind. They walked back to the house, side by side, the quiet comfort of their companionship filling the air. Mark knew that whatever the future held, he wouldn't have to face it alone. The dog, his loyal friend, would always be by his side, a constant reminder that love, hope, and healing are possible, no matter the hardships one faces. Mark stood on the porch, the morning light casting a warm glow over the yard. The dog, now fully recovered, sat beside him, its eyes watching the horizon as if anticipating the day ahead. It had become their routine, these quiet moments, shared in stillness, before the world rushed in. Mark had found a new sense of peace in these moments, a calm he hadn't thought possible. The weight of his past, once so heavy, now felt more like a distant memory, something he could carry without it defining him. The dog had been his guide, showing him that it was okay to move forward, even when the past tried to pull him back. As the dog nudged his hand, looking up at him with those amber eyes, Mark couldn't help but smile. The bond between them had only deepened over time, a bond born from shared struggle, healing, and mutual respect. It wasn't just about rescue anymore. It was about companionship, about finding joy in the simplest things. They had both come so far. The dog, once weak and frail, now strong and full of life, and Mark, once lost in the weight of his past, now learning to embrace the present. The dog's presence had changed him, had taught him that healing wasn't just a process but a way of living. And now, as he sat there, watching the dog rise and stretch, Mark realized how much had shifted in him. The pain of loss still lingered in small, quiet moments, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now was the strength he had found within himself, the love he had learned to give, and the future he was building with his loyal companion by his side. As they began their morning walk, Mark felt the familiar comfort of the dog's presence. It was as though they were walking not just through the yard, but through life, side by side. The bond they shared had become something unbreakable, something that no amount of time or hardship could take away. Together, they had found something worth holding on to, a life built on trust, hope, and the quiet understanding that no matter what came next, they would face it together. And as the sun began to rise higher in the sky, Mark felt a sense of gratitude fill his chest. He was no longer defined by his past. He was defined by the love he had found in the most unexpected place, with a dog who had shown him that even in the darkest times, there was always room for healing, for hope, and for a future worth fighting for.